Hey everyone, welcome back to the deep dive. We've got a great topic to dig into today. You guys send us some really interesting stuff, and this week it's all about learning. Like, how do we actually learn best? What study methods actually get us results?
Yeah, it's a bit of a jungle out there. So many different approaches, so much advice.
Exactly. Yeah. So today we're on a mission to cut through all that noise and really bring you the key insights, the things that are going to help you learn smarter no matter what you're tackling. And one of the most fascinating pieces you guys flagged was this study that looked at the idea of testing yourself, but they took it right into a real classroom.
A real biology classroom.
Oh, yeah.
Undergraduate students.
Yeah, real students, real course material.
Yeah.
It's compelling because for a long time, lab research has suggested that, when you actively try to recall information, it's way more powerful for learning and memory than just passively reviewing it.
Right, right. That's the testing effect, or retrieval enhanced learning. Tons of lab research on that.
But the big question that we're going to dive into today is, does that actually work for everyone in every situation? Because they tell you, test yourself, test yourself. But is that really the best advice for every learner out there?
Good question. And that's where this biology study comes in. They literally took this idea of retrieval practice out of the controlled lab environment and said, okay, let's see what happens when you're dealing with actual course content.
And the messy reality of a classroom.
Exactly, exactly. So they had these undergrads learning about reproduction, and they had them doing these different activities in class. Some were trying to actively remember definitions and diagrams, that's the retrieval piece, and others were just writing down the same information.
Kind of like the classic study approach of taking notes, right?
Exactly, exactly. And then the kicker, a few days later, boom, surprise quiz. Let's see what stuck.
I love that they did a surprise quiz because that's how life works.
Right. They even had the students predict how well they thought they'd do. Like, how confident are you in your learning?
Oh, that's interesting. So they were looking at the metacognition piece too.
Exactly. Yeah, we'll get to that. But before we jump into the results, I think it's worth emphasizing why this study is so important. Because this idea of the testing effect, retrieval enhanced learning, it's got a solid foundation, but it comes from lab settings, right?
Right.
We see the benefits in these controlled studies, learning word lists or vocabulary in another language, even learning from texts or video lectures. There's a great study, actually, by Kang and his colleagues back in 2007. They looked at learning from scientific articles, short answer quizzes, versus just rereading.
And what did they find?
The quizzing, the retrieval practice, led to better learning, but bringing that into a real classroom with students from all different backgrounds, different learning styles, different levels of motivation, and that's a whole different ballgame. So there's this real need to see how this plays out in that context.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so let's break down how they actually set up this classroom study. So we've got these undergraduate students, introductory biology course. What were they learning specifically?
So they were all learning about the same new material, 5 pairs of terms and definitions related to reproduction, plus a diagram illustrating oogenesis.
Oogenesis.
It's the process of egg cell development.
Okay, right. And importantly, this wasn't something they'd already covered in class, but it was on the study guide.
Exactly, new information. So to compare different learning methods, they divided the students into 4 groups. Each group did a different in-class exercise.
Okay, I'm ready. Lay it on me. What were the 4 groups?
All right, so one group, they copied the definitions and they labeled a diagram that was provided for them. Pretty straightforward.
Classic note-taking kind of thing. Got it.
Mm-hmm.
What about the second group?
Second group, same thing, copy the definitions, but this time they had to draw the oogenesis diagram themselves and then label it.
Oh, okay. So a little bit more effort involved there.
A little bit more. Now, for the retrieval groups.
Here we go. This is where it gets interesting.
Right. One retrieval group had to recall the definitions from memory, no looking back, and then label the provided diagram.
Okay, so they're really having to dig deep and pull that information out.
Exactly. And the last group, they also had to recall the definitions from memory, but they had to draw and label the diagram themselves.
Oh, wow. So a lot more cognitive effort involved there.
Yeah.
Oh.
So you can see the key distinction here is actively trying to remember versus just being exposed to the information and writing it down.
Right. Retrieval versus copying, basically.
Mm.
Okay, I'm curious how they decided which students did which activity.
Well, they kept it pretty practical. They used the existing seating arrangement in the classroom. Usually students just sit wherever at the beginning of the semester.
Right, it's kind of random.
Yeah. So they divided the classroom into these different zones. Each zone was assigned one of the four conditions, and they alternated the conditions across the zones.
So they weren't like, okay, all the high achievers over here doing retrieval practice. It was mixed.
Exactly. It was mixed, which makes sense in a real classroom, right?
Totally. So they're doing these activities, and then 5 days later, boom, surprise quiz. I love it.
20 questions in total, half of them testing their knowledge of those definitions, the other half testing their understanding of the concepts, like how well do they really get it?
Right. So that's the setup. Now, the big question is,
Yeah.
what did they find? Who really benefits from testing themselves in this kind of real-world learning situation?
Well, here's where it gets really interesting, because the headline is the effectiveness of retrieval practice, that act of actively recalling those definitions. It wasn't the same for everyone. It really depended on how well the student was doing in the course up to that point, their prior achievement, essentially.
So, like, if they were already a high-achieving student, it mattered more whether they did retrieval practice.
Yeah, the high-performing students, they showed a big improvement in their quiz scores when they'd done the retrieval exercises, compared to just copying. But here's the twist. For the middle and lower performing students, yeah, they actually seem to learn better when they just copied the information.
Whoa. So the advice to always test yourself, maybe not so universal.
Maybe not. And they found this statistically significant interaction between prior performance and retrieval versus copying for those knowledge-based quiz questions, the ones about the definitions.
Interesting. And what about those comprehension questions? The ones testing deeper understanding?
They didn't find the same interaction there. It was just a main effect of performance. High performers, better comprehension no matter the exercise.
So even if they just copied the definitions, they were still able to grasp the concepts better.
Seems that way.
Okay, so why the difference? Why did recalling the information seem to help the high achievers so much more when it came to remembering those definitions?
Well, they dug into this, and it looks like it really comes down to the success of that initial attempt to retrieve. They found this strong link between how well students could recall the definitions during the exercise and their score on the quiz 5 days later.
So basically, if you could remember it in class, you were more likely to remember it on the quiz. But if you couldn't?
Exactly. If you struggled during the exercise, it didn't translate to better quiz performance.
Okay. So how did the different groups do during that initial recall? Was there a big difference between, like, the high performers and the low performers?
Oh yeah, huge difference. The high performers, they could remember way more definitions during the exercise. Like in the recall conditions, they were getting about 35% correct on that first try.
It's pretty good, considering they hadn't seen it before.
Right. But the middle performers, closer to 18%. And the low performers, only around 11%.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it almost seems like if you don't have a certain amount of that information already in your head, trying to retrieve it might not be that helpful.
That's what they're suggesting. Retrieval practice is most effective when you've got a foundation to work with. If your memory of the information is shaky, struggling to recall it might not be as good as that initial exposure through something like copying.
Okay, but I'm thinking about all those lab studies that show that even failed attempts at retrieval can be good for learning, especially if you get feedback afterwards.
Right, good point. The researchers address that. They point out that those lab studies often use simpler materials. It's a controlled environment, in a real classroom with tougher material, maybe less motivation.
More distractions, more pressure.
Exactly. A failed retrieval attempt might just lead to frustration, not that aha learning moment.
Right, right. And didn't they mention a study with elementary school kids that kind of supports this?
Yeah, Karpik and his colleagues, they found that if initial retrieval success was low, retrieval practice wasn't better than other activities, which really fits with what we're seeing in this biology classroom.
Fascinating. So it's not just about testing yourself, it's about being ready to be tested in a way.
I like that, being retrieval ready.
Okay, now I want to circle back to that metacognition piece. The students predicting how well they do on the quiz. What do they find there?
So the high performers, they were generally pretty good at predicting their scores, especially after doing those retrieval exercises.
So they knew what they knew.
Exactly. Good metacognitive calibration. But the middle and low performers, they tended to be overconfident, especially after copying the information.
Like, I wrote it down, I must know it.
Yeah, that feeling of fluency can be deceiving.
Right. And this overconfidence in lower performers, that's not a new finding, is it?
No, there's other research on this. Miller and Gerasi, Boll and his colleagues, they've all found similar patterns.
Interesting. So anything else about these predictions?
One more thing. Across all the students, they actually predicted they'd do better on the quiz that was 5 days away compared to an immediate quiz.
Makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Figured they'd have time to study.
Yeah. But even when they did study, the lower performers still overestimated their scores. So studying alone didn't fix that disconnect.
Okay, so much to unpack here. What's the takeaway for our listener who's trying to figure out the best way to study?
I think the big takeaway is that retrieval practice, it's not a magic bullet. It really aligns with this idea called the expertise reversal effect, which basically says that what works for beginners might not work for experts, and vice versa.
Oh, that's interesting. So if you're brand new to a subject, maybe focus on really understanding the basics before you start quizzing yourself like crazy.
Yeah. Read carefully, take good notes, work through examples, build that foundation. Once you have that, then retrieval practice can really take you to the next level.
Makes sense. And it was interesting that in this study, retrieval practice mostly helped with remembering facts, not so much with the deeper understanding.
Right. They suggest maybe different types of retrieval are needed for that. Asking yourself why questions, trying to explain things in your own words.
More challenging retrieval.
Yeah, exactly. And they actually point to research by Jensen and his colleagues and Hinz and his team that supports that idea.
So maybe it's not just about testing yourself, but about testing yourself in the right way at the right time.
Absolutely. And making sure you have enough knowledge to actually retrieve something. If you're constantly drawing a blank, it might be more frustrating than helpful.
Right. Especially in a real classroom setting.
And we have to remember there are other factors at play too. Motivation, how you learn from feedback.
It's complex.
Yeah, it's not one size fits all.
All right, so let's bring this home for our listener. You shared these resources because
Yeah.
you want to know how to study effectively. And what this deep dive tells us is whether testing yourself is the best approach depends on where you're at with the material.
If you've got a good grasp of the basics, retrieval practice can be super powerful. But if you're just starting out, maybe focus on building that foundation first.
It's like anything. You need the right tool for the job.
Exactly.
Now, we'd love to hear from you, listener. Have you ever noticed that sometimes self-testing feels awesome, and other times it's like hitting a wall?
Maybe think about your level of knowledge in those situations. Did that play a role?
This is a fascinating conversation, and it opens up so many questions. What other individual differences might affect how we learn best? And how can educators create learning experiences that really meet everyone's needs?
It's all about personalized learning, right? Figuring out what works best for you.
And maybe the key is not just how we study, but when and what we choose to test ourselves on. Matching that challenge to our current knowledge so we get those aha moments without feeling overwhelmed.
That's something to ponder.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep those brains firing.
See you next time.